Of course, the big news is the DeepSeek, which is the Chinese AI which came out over the weekend. I suggest not taking any big knee-jerk reactions. This is kind of breaking news over the weekend. Markets are trying to absorb what this means, what it doesn't mean. It's all just unfolding for the most part. So we're going to go through kind of the data we've got so far, but things are going to change over the next few days. Is this the watershed moment for the markets? We'll try to figure this out this morning a little bit, but this AI thing, right, that's going on, this is our Sputnik moment, right? This is back to the space race of the 50s and the 60s. I wouldn't make any big knee-jerk adjustments this morning.
You're listening to The Real Investment Show.
So let's go through a little bit about what is DeepSeek, why is it different, and what does this kind of mean, potentially to the markets? And again, kind of going back to this idea of Sputnik, this is kind of the market Sputnik moment for AI. What does this mean for the U.S.? So first of all, let's just kind of go through some of the differentiators between ChatGPT as an example and DeepSeek. The Chinese really kind of rethought everything from the ground up, and traditional AI is like writing every number with 32 decimal places, and DeepSeek says, well, we'll just do it with 8 decimal places. Now, immediately, what should come to your mind is that it's not as accurate, and that's true. It's not. It's about 90% accurate, and the thesis is, well, that's good enough. That's good enough for most things, right? But there are certain things that I don't want 90% accurate on, like, surgery, diagnosis. I'm 90% certain you don't have cancer, right? That 10% can make a big difference. So that's one thing to think about. But for general purposes, 90% is good enough. So instead of using 32 decimal places, they're using 8 for the math, and they can derive the answer a lot more efficiently. And DeepSeek has done well, in a heads-up competition, it's answering the question. And it certainly is doing what it says it can do. Now, they also use a multi-token system, which means that basically normally the way our AI works right now is that if it's reading a sentence, it reads it one word at a time, right? The cat ran. Well, DeepSeek reads the whole phrase at one time. So instead of reading it, that makes and reading the whole phrase at once rather than one word at a time, it makes DeepSeek about 2 times faster than current AI. Again, it's only 90% as accurate by doing that, but it's faster. And as I was saying before, the real clever bit is they built these expert systems, and so you have your doctor, you have your lawyer, you have your engineer, and the only part that wakes up is the part that needs to answer the question, so that on an energy usage basis, that makes things more efficient and faster. Again, because I don't have to wake up the whole brain to answer a question about engineering. I just have to wake up one of the brains to answer the questions about engineering. So, and that's why, the traditional models use, and I'm going to read some data for you here that I've got. Traditional models, all 1.8 trillion parameters, it's kind of hard to fathom, are active all the time. With DeepSeek, only about 671 billion in total, which only has about 671 billion in total versus the 1.8 trillion parameters. But they only wake up about 37 billion at once. These numbers are staggering in terms of what's going on, but it's like having a huge team of people. They're only calling in experts as they need them. So the results are quite important. So here's some of the numbers and why this is why markets are down so sharply this morning. Because again, you think about all the money that's been spent so far on building out data centers and GPUs and all these type of things for training these large language models. Training cost for DeepSeek, $100 million for traditional AI, $5 million for DeepSeek. GPUs needed, $100,000 for traditional AI, $2,000 for DeepSeek. API costs are about 95% cheaper. They can run on gaming, and here's the catch right here. DeepSeek can run on gaming GPUs versus data center hardware. Now, NVIDIA makes both of those, right? They make the gaming GPUs as well as the big data center hardware. Now, the GPUs are much cheaper, right? So if I can run this on GPUs versus Blackwell, as an example, if I can run this on an RTX 490 versus a Blackwell chip, I can save millions of dollars in cost. Now, NVIDIA still collects that revenue. They're just collecting a lot less revenue. And of course, a lot of the run-up in NVIDIA has been based on the expectations for this AI data center growth. So what's interesting about all this is first of all, DeepSeek will never come to the U.S. because it's Chinese. The U.S., from a national security standpoint, is never going to allow us to use DeepSeek because they don't, just like with TikTok, right? The whole TikTok ban. We don't want China accumulating all the data here in the U.S. And this was what was hysterical. During the whole TikTok ban, if you didn't know this, all these influencers ran out and jumped on Lemonade, which was the other kind of TikTok channel, which was entirely Chinese owned, and they just sucked in all of their information, right? I mean, like banking information and credit card information, personal information. They just willingly gave it up because they were so afraid of the TikTok ban. They all jumped on this other app. But so there's going to be a real likelihood that DeepSeek will be banned from the U.S., which gives some control right now over AI in the U.S. But as I said before, this is the Sputnik moment. And there are some ramifications, particularly for private equity. You can bet your bottom dollar this morning that there are engineers all across this country waking up, going in their office super early this morning to start taking the ideas that DeepSeek generated and putting them to work and beginning to redevelop and begin to reconstitute current AI to use these ideas. So that's going to happen. Again, this is what happened during the Sputnik race, is that when Russia got Sputnik up, we immediately kicked into high gear to play catch up. That's where we are this morning. The U.S. is now in catch up mode to China. They are winning this race right now. That $500 billion Stargate initiative that was announced last week, that got the markets all excited, we're going to overshoot that by a large degree. Now, the amount of spend that's about to come from Microsoft, Google, Meta, etc., is going to exponentially increase to catch up, because this is not just about AI, this is also about national security. This is why I'm saying be a little bit cautious about making big assessments about today. We've got to start thinking ahead a little bit about what comes next from this. And again, there's certainly some negative ramifications that can come out of this. Absolutely. For some of these companies, right? The private equity companies that are investing heavily in startups right now, that's probably dead money. There's going to be a lot of those startup companies this morning that are dead men walking. So if you're in a private equity AI fund, you better start doing some heavy analysis of what is actually inside that fund, because a lot of those companies will never come to fruition. There's going to be a shift with private equity in terms of this. I think sooner than later, I think we'll start seeing that fall out pretty quickly. I think that's going to show up. The other side of this, though, is I think that we're about to see and it wouldn't be surprising if we don't see an announcement from the White House today, tomorrow, next week relating to this, talking about initiatives to accelerate what's going on. And then this doesn't change some of the other underlying factors that we've been talking about here on the show relating to AI. So it's not just the Apples and Microsoft and Googles of the world doing AI. There's other aspects to this that are going to be accelerated because of this change, not degraded, and that's infrastructure. We've talked about power generation. We've talked about power transmission, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence use in the military, right? Those aren't changing. Now, the development of AI is going to change, and that's going to only accelerate from here. So one thing that you've got to just be a little bit careful about this morning is there's a lot of conspiracy theories out about all of this morning. Everybody's got an opinion. Let me tell you something. I have no idea what comes next at this point. We're going to figure that out. It's too soon to tell. This was a sea change moment for the markets. We've got to work through it, figure out who's going to win from this, who's going to lose from this. We can make some early assumptions, but you can take for all these headlines you're going to read today, bullish, bearish, etc., about 1% of it's going to be accurate because nobody knows. So most of this stuff that we're talking about this morning, I mean, other than the basic facts, I mean, we know some of the basic facts about what it costs to train DeepSeek. We know kind of how it works, etc. All that we know. Where the market goes from here and what happens with AI next is unknown. So, volatility in the markets, you bet. Is it going to sort itself out in relatively short order? Don't know. Is AI changing from being a major trend in markets? Not only just AI itself, but the infrastructure, the power generation, etc. That's not changing. Weightings of where we invest may change. We all knew this day was going to come with AI. We talked about this on the show before, is that example, and specifically at the time we were talking about NVIDIA. And NVIDIA has a very wide moat right now around their business and chip development. And as we said back then, it says at some point, don't know when, some company's going to come up, they're going to develop a better chip, a faster chip, a cheaper chip. And it's going to change the game. Same thing with AI, right? So this day was always going to come. We just didn't expect it to come over the weekend. And that's, unfortunately, the market's having to reconcile that this morning. But this also brings up a couple of other issues that we've talked about here on the show before, and this is going to be an issue as we go forward. One of the benefits that DeepSeek has over our AI is that it's open source. So you just have a lot of people contributing ideas versus engineers here in America, which are bogged down in meetings and bureaucracy, and when they want to develop something, they've got to get approval, and that approval's got to get approval from somebody else, and it's a slow process. Open source makes that very fast because you don't have you're not spending half your day in meetings trying to figure something out. You're just implementing stuff and then working with it on the fly, and you implement something and somebody comes along and makes it better. And that's the way open source works. It's very fast. It's very efficient. And that's an advantage that DeepSeek has over AI here in America. So one thing that we need to think about doing is unleashing our engineers. And just this morning, the mandate should be, I don't care what it costs. I don't care what you do. You don't need to ask permission for anything. Go do it. Build me a better AI. And I want it by 2 o'clock this afternoon, no coffee breaks. But we need to unleash jokingly, but we do need to unleash our engineers. We have very, very smart engineers, rocket scientists, physicists, you name it, all working on this from every aspect. We need to let them go. We need to unharness that technology and that talent that we have to develop this race, because we are now, make no mistake, we are in a race. Whoever winds up with AI, and I'm pretty sure that you will all agree we don't want China to be the winner of this race. That's maybe just me, my competitive nature coming out that, I think we should win the race. But we have the ability to win it. We just got to figure out how to do it. And we've got to get there, and we've got to get there quick. But this also highlights another problem that we have today that we didn't have in the 50s and the 60s. In the 1950s and 60s in particular, and really in the 70s more so, we were ranked in the top 5 countries in math, science, reading, etc. Today, we're beat out in most aspects by Estonia. And this has been really a function of the fact that we launched the Department of Education in 1980, and ever since then, our quality of education has declined rapidly. We were spending all the last 4 years graduating people from college with degrees in queer studies, etc. No joke. Those were actual degrees. Degrees in colonization, right? All these type of things. Rather than focusing on what China does, which is limits access to social media and focuses their social media on STEM. Science, technology, math, etc. We need to get back to that. We have a big gap in terms of education. Now this is going to be critical, right? We're talking about deportation of illegals and all this other stuff. We need to be focusing very hard right now on immigration of talent. Regardless that China is in the lead on this, and regardless that China has a very educated workforce in a lot of cases, they still don't want to live there. You give them the opportunity to move from communism to capitalism, they'll make that choice. So we do need to focus on immigrating more talent to make up for the gap in talent in our education system, because we're not educating our kids. There's a huge gap between our kids coming out of college and those in countries like China, India. We educate a lot of them, they go back home to those countries as well. But we need to focus on education. And this has been one aspect of the Trump administration, talking about returning education back to the states. That would probably be a good thing. Let states focus on how they want to educate their children better. But we need to go back to focusing on the things that drive economic development over time, and that is education in those areas. Engineering, math, science, technology. Because that's where we're headed. We can't deny the fact that AI is coming, and it's now coming like a freight train. Stuff that we thought was going to take several more years to develop are now talking about being here in the next year or two. The speed of development of AI and the speed of implementation of AI is going to dramatically increase because of this. Because now it's a race. It's a race that people have to win. So no longer is it a function of, I've got this idea and it's going to take me 5 years to develop it. Private equity is now talking to their investments going, yeah, that idea you had, we want it deployed next week. Being a little bit facetious, but you get my point. Because they can't wait. Because if you wait, somebody else is going to beat you to that, and your investment is now worthless. And that's why I was saying a lot of these private equity investments, if you're in a private equity AI fund, I would seriously get into that fund today to figure out what those investments are. Because again, a lot of those are probably dead money now because of this. But this innovation out of China does and should be a wake-up call to the administration. It should be a wake-up call to us as parents. Because we've been asleep at the wheel for the last 15 years in terms of education. Last 4 years in particular has just been a really good example of just how out of touch with where we should be putting our efforts versus where we were putting our efforts. You know, we were running towards things that don't create economic expansion and increase broader economic participation. You know, we've talked about the wealth gap in America. 88% of the stock market is owned by 10% of households. That's not the type of equity dynamic that we want. You know, we spent the last 4 years talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. Nobody was ever talking about economic equity. And that's not giving people money, right? That's giving them the ability to participate in the system. Making sure there's opportunity available for them. Making sure they have the right education to participate in the system. And again, this is, you know, you can't get past this one hurdle, which is capitalism is easy. You just have to participate in it, but you got to have the right skill set to participate in it. If we're not teaching our kids to have the right skill set, they can't participate in the system, so they don't get that economic benefit of capitalism. They're left outside of it because they don't have the skill set to participate. It's like showing up to a baseball game. You've never played baseball in your life. You've never even seen a baseball game in your life. You have no idea. You just see people standing around on a field with gloves on their hands and some guy throwing a ball at you 100 miles an hour while you're standing at the plate. You have no idea you're supposed to swing the bat. You've never seen the game. So how are you supposed to play the game if you've never even seen it? Or better yet, you walk into a garage and there's parts of a car all over the floor, and they say, well, if you put it together, you can have the car. Never seen a car before. Because we never taught people the basics. So they can't participate in a system that they don't understand, they don't know the rules of, and they don't have the education for. Now this is going to come very rapidly that we're going to see that gap start to show up over the next 15, 20 years. Because there's a big education gap that's coming that way as those recent generations become more mainstream. That gap in education is going to become very relevant. You know, spending 5-6 hours on TikTok doesn't help that problem. Productivity is an issue. China doesn't have that issue. We have that issue. So this is going to be all hands on deck from this. And it's going to be interesting to watch how this turns out. But make no mistake, we are now back in the space race. This time it's just cyberspace race.